think, Marge. All I need is a title.
So, as of now, the government shutdown of January 2018 lasted a quick 3 days, and the doors opened on Tuesday. However, even though this crisis has been kicked down the road until the following deadline of February 8th, I figured it might be nice to tell you a bit about government shutdowns, and what happens when the government shuts down, and the history of government shutdowns. To begin, I must tell you that the history of government shutdowns is actually pretty interesting, not because of the hurt it causes our military and our citizens, but because of the various things that are at the center of each shutdown. Let's be clear about this. A government shutdown means that the military does not get paid. It means that anywhere between 200,000 to upwards of millions of people do not work at their government jobs. Our intelligence services are impaired by a government shutdown, meaning that each day of each shutdown is actually a threat to our national security and to the men and women in our intelligence services. Let's also be clear. The U.S. Postal Service will remain in operation. Social Security checks, food stamps, and other essential payments will be made. Tax returns will be delayed, but in this case, a 3-day shutdown probably won't make much difference. Officially, the January 2018 shutdown was caused when Democrats filibustered a spending measure because it did not include a solution for the DACA situation. A vote was held late on Friday evening, but it failed, and the government closed its doors. The weekend was filled with both sides blaming the other side, but the president and the GOP had the edge because the Democrats had linked an unrelated issue, DACA, to payroll spending for the military and funding for a health program for about 9 million children. Within a day, the Dems knew that they were on the wrong side of the messaging on this situation. And that seemed to give them the motivation to resolve the issue and to at least temporarily reopen the government. It also did not help that Democrats who were complaining about the president and the GOP standing in front of the DACA program were some of the same people who said that introducing an unassociated issue to a spending measure in the face of a government shutdown would be, quote-unquote, governmental chaos.
We could say we're shutting down the government, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling until you pass immigration reform. It would be governmental chaos.
I know. In the news article, Fox News reported that the GOP agreed to take up the issue of immigration and the DACA issue very soon, which most members of Congress, as well as the president, support. So while this could have been a very long shutdown, given that the Dems do not want to provide any real funding for the border wall that President Trump wants, and the president and the GOP don't want to and should not concede any ground on chain migration and the visa lottery system, the Dems simply caved to minimal pressure and bad cinematics. To put it simply, President Trump beat the Democrats and may very well do so again in February. Since 1976, there have been 19 instances where various confrontations have caused the U.S. government to partially or fully shut down. The entire thing was the result of the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, which came about because of an argument between the Nixon administration, which wanted executive power to keep governmental spending under control, and Congress, who thought that such power would be an excessive overreach. The resulting reforms created the framework that we have today, and if Congress does not pass a budget plan or a continuing resolution to temporarily keep departmental funding at its current levels, the government shuts down until such time as a resolution to the issue can be passed. The shutdown of January 2018 was surprisingly one of the shorter ones, with New York Senator Chuck Schumer receiving tremendous blame from across the political spectrum, with the GOP saying that he pulled in an unrelated subject into their funding talks, and with liberals saying that he caved in to almost no pressure. The first government shutdown in October of 1976 resulted from the aftermath of a presidential veto of a bill funding one department, but the Congress then failed to pass a continuing resolution to fund the rest of the departments. The first shutdown lasted 11 days. During the 1980s, there was generally at least one government shutdown each year, none of which lasted more than 3 days. Big issues caused shutdowns, as after the first, the next 3 shutdowns centered around an argument over funding for abortion in Medicaid. Roe v. Wade had been decided in 1973, so the issue still caused a lot of disagreement in the first few years following the decision. Perhaps the weirdest shutdown was at the end of September of 1982, when both Congress and President Reagan were at social engagements and forgot to keep funding to the government in place. Funding for nuclear weapons, Title IX exemptions, AFDC funding, support for the Contras in Nicaragua, and reinstatement of the Fairness Doctrine were other issues that caused governmental shutdowns during the Reagan era. George H.W. Bush promised to veto any continuing resolution that did not contain a plan to reduce the federal budget deficit, and when Congress failed to give him this, the government shut down. The longest government shutdown in history to this point occurred in December of 1995 and into January of 1996, and it was over whether the government would use congressional or administration numbers to figure out the budget. This shutdown caused a lot of political damage to the reputation of then House Speaker Newt Gingrich because of a supposed snub of Gingrich by President Bill Clinton during a trip on Air Force One. Perhaps the most notorious shutdown happened during 17 days in October 2013 when a group of Republicans, led by Texas Senator Ted Cruz, attempted to get a reduction in the funding of Obamacare. Cruz was undercut by House Majority Leader John Boehner, who supported a measure without the cuts to Obamacare. In the end, this latest government shutdown had the possibility of becoming one of the longer, more contentious disputes, but the reality has turned out to be something different. Perhaps there will be a DACA deal by February 8th, but even if not, Senator Schumer has basically indicated that the government will not shut down at that time, but rather that the Senate will immediately bring up legislation regarding DACA. It will quickly fade into memory, perhaps much to Chuck Schumer's relief.